My boss said an autistic person will never be a leader. Today, I run the department she came from. I never thought that the same traits that made me difficult as a child would one day make me the youngest department head in my company's history. My name is Sarah, I'm 28 years old, and I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when I was 7. For most of my life, I heard the same words over and over. You're too rigid, you don't understand people, you can't handle change. But the story I'm about to tell you will show how those supposed weaknesses became my greatest strengths. Before I continue with the story that completely changed my perspective on what it means to be autistic in the workplace, if you believe that our differences can be our superpowers, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories about neurodivergence and overcoming prejudice. Your support helps us reach more people who need to hear these messages. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in September when I walked into the offices of TechFlow Solutions for my first day as a junior data analyst. I had just graduated with honors in computer science, but I was terrified. Not because of the technical challenges, I was confident in my abilities with numbers and systems. I was afraid of the people. During my job interview, I had disclosed my autism diagnosis, as I always did. I believed in transparency, even knowing it might hurt my chances. The hiring manager, David, had seemed understanding, even impressed by my technical skills and attention to detail. But I hadn't met my direct supervisor yet. Her name was Margaret Torres, a 45-year-old woman who had been with the company for 8 years and ran the data analytics department with what everyone called an iron fist. She was known for her quick decisions, her ability to read people, and her talent for office politics, everything I struggled with. When David introduced us, I tried to make eye contact and smile, but I could feel my face getting tense. Margaret looked me up and down with an expression I couldn't quite read. "So you're the new analyst," she said, her voice neutral. "David told me about your condition. I hope it won't be a problem." I felt my stomach drop. "It won't be a problem, Mrs. Torres. I'm very good at what I do." "We'll see," she replied, turning to David. "I'll need to keep a close eye on this one. You know how important client relationships are in this department." From day one, Margaret made it clear that she saw my autism as a liability. While my colleagues got interesting projects involving client presentations and team leadership, I was given routine data cleaning tasks and basic analysis work. When I finished my assignments quickly and accurately, instead of giving me more challenging work, she would find mistakes in the tiniest details. "Sarah, this chart needs to be exactly 12-point font, not 11.8, she would say, standing over my desk. "And the margins need to be precisely 1 inch. I can't have work that looks sloppy going to clients." I would fix it immediately, but I noticed that when my neurotypical colleagues made similar mistakes, she would just mention it in passing. With me, every error became a teaching moment about attention to detail and professional standards. The worst part was the team meetings. Margaret would ask everyone to brainstorm solutions to problems, and I would have carefully thought out ideas based on data analysis I had done in my free time. But when I would start to present my thoughts, she would cut me off. "Sarah, that's very thorough," she would say with a patronizing smile. "But we need to think about the human element here. Data is just numbers, real business requires understanding people." My colleagues would nod along, and I would sink back into my chair, my prepared notes feeling useless in my hands. After these meetings, I would go to the bathroom and stim by tapping my fingers against my leg, trying to calm down the overwhelming feeling of being misunderstood. 3 months into the job, things got worse. Margaret assigned me to help with a project for one of our biggest clients, a retail chain looking to optimize their inventory management. But instead of letting me contribute to the strategy, she had me format reports and double-check calculations. "Just make sure the numbers add up," she told me. "I'll handle the strategic thinking." But as I worked with the data, I started noticing patterns that no one else had caught. The client was losing money not because of inventory levels, but because of seasonal trends that weren't being accounted for in their ordering system. I spent my lunch breaks creating visualizations and building predictive models that could save them hundreds of thousands of dollars. When I tried to show Margaret my findings, she barely looked at my screen. "Sarah, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't what we need right now. Just focus on the tasks I've given you." "But Mrs. Torres, I think I found something important. If we adjust their ordering algorithm to account for these seasonal patterns." "Sarah," her voice was sharp, "I need you to understand something. This is a client-facing project. It requires leadership skills, strategic thinking, and the ability to communicate with people. Those aren't your strengths." I felt like I had been slapped. "I think I communicate just fine." She sighed and sat down, adopting what I now recognize as her teaching voice. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean. You're very good at what you do, following instructions, working with numbers, catching small errors. But leadership requires emotional intelligence, flexibility, the ability to read a room. You're autistic, Sarah. Those skills just aren't accessible to you. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking. I understand people just fine. I just express it differently. Do you? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Because from where I'm sitting, you seem to miss social cues, you get overwhelmed in meetings, and you struggle with change. Those are significant barriers to advancement. I wanted to argue, but I could feel myself starting to shut down. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the sounds of the office too loud. I excused myself and went to the supply closet, where I often went to regulate when I felt overwhelmed. Sitting on the floor between boxes of printer paper, I started to cry. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe I was fooling myself thinking I could be more than just a data processor. Maybe autism really was a limitation I couldn't overcome. The next few weeks were the hardest of my career. Margaret seemed to watch me constantly, waiting for me to make mistakes. She would schedule impromptu meetings and then criticize me for taking too long to adjust to the change. She would ask me to present to the team and then interrupt me when I didn't make eye contact the way she expected. Sarah, you need to look at people when you talk to them, she would say in front of everyone. It's basic professional communication. I started masking harder than I ever had before. I forced myself to make eye contact even when it felt like staring into the sun. I practiced natural gestures in the mirror. I studied my colleagues' small talk and tried to mimic their casual conversations. But the more I masked, the more exhausted I became. One day, I overheard Margaret talking to another manager in the break room. I don't know what HR was thinking, hiring someone like that, she said. She's smart, I'll give her that, but she'll never be management material. An autistic person will never be a leader. They just don't have the interpersonal skills. I stood frozen outside the door, holding my coffee cup with shaking hands. Her words felt like a verdict on my entire future. That night, I went home and seriously considered quitting. Maybe I should find a job where I could work alone, where I wouldn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. But then I remembered the data I had analyzed for the retail client. I thought about all the patterns I had seen that others had missed, all the solutions I had developed that were dismissed. I realized that my autism wasn't making me a bad employee. It was making me see things that neurotypical people couldn't. I decided to do something that went against every instinct I had. I was going to prove Margaret wrong, not by masking better, but by being more authentically myself. The next morning, I asked for a meeting with David, the hiring manager. In his office, I pulled out a folder with all the work I had done on the retail client project. The analysis Margaret had dismissed. David, I need to show you something, I said, my hands shaking slightly. I found a way to save our client over $300,000 annually. He looked skeptical, but he listened as I walked him through my data. I showed him the seasonal patterns, the predictive models, the optimization algorithms I had developed. For the first time in months, I felt like I was doing what I was meant to do. Sarah, this is incredible, he said, staring at my visualizations. Have you shown this to Margaret? I tried. She said it wasn't what we needed. David frowned. This is exactly what we need. The client has been struggling with these inventory issues for years. You've solved their primary problem. I know, I said, finally allowing myself to feel proud. But Margaret doesn't think I have the skills for strategic work. She says autistic people can't be leaders. The expression on David's face changed completely. She said what? I realized I had just opened a door I couldn't close. She doesn't think I'm capable of advancement because of my autism. She says I lack emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills. David was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Has Margaret been treating you differently because of your autism? I had never articulated it so clearly before, but as I started talking, months of frustration poured out. I told him about the isolation, the constant micromanagement, the way she dismissed my ideas and criticized my communication style. I told him about the comments about my condition and her belief that autistic people couldn't be leaders. This is completely unacceptable, David said. And more importantly, it's completely wrong. Sarah, you just presented the most innovative solution I've seen in years. You notice patterns that our entire team missed. That's not a lack of leadership ability, that's exceptional analytical leadership. 2 days later, I found myself in a conference room with David, Margaret, and HR Director Jennifer Walsh. Margaret looked confused and slightly annoyed, clearly not understanding why she had been called to this meeting. We're here to discuss the retail client project, David began, and some concerning issues about team management. He presented my analysis to the group, walking through the seasonal patterns and cost savings I had identified. Margaret's face went pale as she realized what was happening. This is exceptional work, Jennifer said, studying my models. Sarah, how long did this take you to develop? I've been working on it for about 6 weeks, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mostly during lunch breaks and after hours. 6 weeks, David repeated, looking at Margaret. And you were aware of this work? Margaret shifted uncomfortably. Sarah showed me some data, but I didn't think it was relevant to our current objectives. Not relevant? Jennifer asked. This could save our client hundreds of thousands of dollars. How is that not relevant? I watched Margaret struggle to find an answer. Finally, she said, look, Sarah is very good with numbers, but this project requires client presentation skills, strategic communication. I didn't think she was ready for that level of responsibility. Based on what? David asked. Based on her autism, Margaret said, as if it was obvious. She struggles with social interaction, she's rigid in her thinking, she gets overwhelmed in meetings. Those aren't leadership qualities. The room went silent. Jennifer looked shocked. David looked angry. And I felt something I hadn't felt in months, vindicated. Margaret, Jennifer said slowly, are you saying you've been limiting Sarah's opportunities because of her disability? I'm saying I've been realistic about her limitations, Margaret replied defensively. I'm not being discriminatory, I'm being practical. By assuming what she can and can't do based on her neurological differences? David asked. I found my voice. Mrs. Torres, you say I'm rigid in my thinking, but I'm the one who saw solutions that no one else could see. You say I struggle with social interaction, but I spend hours studying our clients' needs and behaviors. You say I get overwhelmed in meetings, but that's because I'm processing information at a level that others aren't. Margaret stared at me. Sarah, you don't understand, eh? No, you don't understand, I interrupted, feeling bolder than I had in months. You've been so focused on the way I communicate that you've ignored what I'm actually communicating. You've been so concerned about whether I make eye contact that you've missed the fact that I'm making eye contact with the data in ways that solve real problems. Jennifer leaned forward. Sarah, I need to ask you directly. Do you feel you've been discriminated against because of your autism? I took a deep breath. Yes. I've been given routine tasks while my colleagues get challenging projects. My ideas are dismissed before they're considered. I'm criticized for behaviors that are part of my neurological makeup while my work quality is ignored. Mrs. Torres told me that autistic people can't be leaders, but she's never actually given me a chance to lead. Margaret's face was red. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, David said. And it's exactly what you said. I have witnesses to that conversation. Over the next hour, the meeting became a reckoning. Jennifer explained the company's policies on disability accommodation and discrimination. David outlined the value of my work and the opportunities one had been denied. And I, for the first time, advocated for myself with complete honesty about my experiences. I want to be clear, I said toward the end of the meeting. I'm not asking for special treatment because I'm autistic. I'm asking for the same opportunities as everyone else. My autism isn't a limitation, it's the reason I can see patterns others miss, focus on details others overlook, and develop solutions others can't imagine. Margaret was transferred to a different department the following week. David asked me to take the lead on the retail client project, and when I presented my findings to the client's executive team, they were so impressed that they extended our contract for 3 additional years. But the real change came in how I saw myself. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to hide my autism and started leveraging it. I created systems that played to my strengths: detailed analysis, pattern recognition, logical problem solving. I learned to communicate my ideas in ways that worked for me rather than trying to mimic neurotypical communication styles. 6 months later, I was promoted to senior analyst. A year after that, I became a team lead. And 2 years after that conversation where Margaret said autistic people could never be leaders, I was promoted to department head of data analytics, the same position Margaret had held. The day I got the promotion, I was in David's office signing paperwork when he said something that stayed with me. Sarah, you know what makes you an exceptional leader? It's not despite your autism, it's because of it. You see things differently, you think systematically, you're honest and direct. Those are exactly the qualities we need in leadership. Today, I manage a team of 12 analysts, and our department has become one of the most profitable in the company. I've implemented new systems that play to each team member's strengths, created accommodations for different working styles, and fostered an environment where diverse thinking is valued, not just tolerated. 3 months ago, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't expect, Margaret Torres. She had been reading about neurodiversity in the workplace and wanted to apologize. We met for coffee, and she told me something that shocked me. "Sarah, I need you to know that my comments about autism and leadership came from ignorance, not malice. I was taught that good leaders had to be charismatic, socially skilled, adaptable. I never considered that there might be different ways to be effective." She paused, stirring her coffee. "I've been learning about autism and neurodiversity since our meeting with HR. I realize now that I wasn't protecting the company from your limitations, I was limiting the company from your strengths." I accepted her apology, but more importantly, I used it as an opportunity to educate. I explained how autism affects me, how I process information differently, how my need for routine and structure actually makes me more reliable and thorough. I told her about the accommodations that help me thrive and the strengths that my neurological differences provide. "I wish I had known this when we worked together," she said. "I might have learned something." "You still can," I replied. Understanding neurodiversity isn't just about working with autistic people, it's about recognizing that everyone's brain works differently and that cognitive diversity makes teams stronger. That conversation led to something unexpected. Margaret asked if I would be willing to speak at a company-wide training session on neurodiversity and inclusive leadership. Standing in front of 200 colleagues, many of whom had seen me struggle and mask for years, I shared my story. "I used to believe that being autistic meant I had to work twice as hard to be half as good," I told them. "I thought leadership meant being someone I wasn't. But I've learned that authentic leadership comes from understanding your strengths and using them to serve others." I talked about how my attention to detail catches errors that save the company money. How my systematic thinking helps me develop processes that improve efficiency. How my direct communication style eliminates confusion and builds trust with clients. How my ability to focus intensely allows me to solve complex problems that others find overwhelming. Autism isn't a limitation I've overcome, I concluded. It's a strength I've learned to embrace. And when we create environments where neurodivergent people can be authentically themselves, everyone benefits. The response was overwhelming. Colleagues I barely knew approached me afterward to share their own stories about hidden disabilities, family members with autism, and their own experiences with masking and accommodation. Several people asked about getting evaluations for ADHD or autism, recognizing traits in themselves that they had never understood. Most importantly, 3 other autistic employees in the company came forward to connect with me. They had been masking so effectively that no one, including me, had realized they were part of the neurodivergent community. Together, we started an employee resource group for neurodivergent workers. Today, our company has become a model for neurodiversity inclusion. We've implemented flexible work arrangements, sensory-friendly meeting spaces, and clear communication protocols. We've trained managers on different communication styles and thinking patterns. We've created mentorship programs that pair neurodivergent employees with advocates and allies. Our department's success hasn't gone unnoticed. Last month, I was invited to speak at a national conference on neurodiversity in tech. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of people who wanted to learn about inclusive leadership, I thought about that scared young woman who used to hide in supply closets to regulate her nervous system. The title of my talk was The Autism Advantage: How Neurodivergent Thinking Drives Innovation. I opened with a story about a boss who once told me that autistic people could never be leaders and how that limitation existed only in her imagination, not in reality. Leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, I told the audience. It's about seeing what others miss, saying what others won't, and persisting when others give up. Those are autistic strengths, not autistic limitations. After my presentation, a young man approached me with tears in his eyes. "I'm autistic and I'm starting my first job next month," he said. "I've been terrified that I'll never be taken seriously. Your story gives me hope." I gave him the advice I wish someone had given me at his age: don't hide who you are. The world needs your unique perspective. The right people will see your autism as the advantage it is. That's the message I want to leave with you today. If you're neurodivergent, you don't need to mask or minimize yourself to be successful. Your differences aren't deficits, they're distinctive strengths that the world needs. If you're neurotypical, I challenge you to examine your assumptions about what leadership looks like and what intelligence sounds like. Margaret was wrong about many things, but she was right about one: autism does make me different. It makes me see patterns others miss, focus on details others overlook, and approach problems from angles others don't consider. It makes me direct when others are diplomatic, persistent when others give up, and systematic when others are chaotic. These aren't limitations, they're leadership qualities. And today, as I sit in the office that used to be Margaret's, leading the department she once thought I could never handle, I'm grateful for every trait that makes me authentically, unapologetically autistic. Because the truth is, you don't succeed in spite of being neurodivergent. You succeed because of it. And once you understand that difference, there's no limit to what you can achieve.